I am Team Popeyes for biscuit all day. And I was such a weird kid. Like, my favorite thing to eat was a biscuit, and I would wrap it in the skin of a fried chicken thigh from Popeyes, douse it with hot sauce and honey, and I would just be happy. Hi, I'm Adrienne Cheatham, chef and author of Sunday Best, and today we are making biscuits and sausage gravy. The first thing we want to do is grate our butter because you want to have it cold. If it sits too long, it'll heat up. So you want to use the large side of a box grater. So you want your butter to be super cold because once it softens, it clumps together, and it'll also moisten the flour a little bit more than you want. There are a couple of different camps when it comes to biscuits. Some people don't like them to be layered. Some people like them to just be one kind of puffed up like square of deliciousness. I like to pull apart the layers of like a really laminated biscuit because then it's also easier to cut when you want to make a sandwich. So we are good to go. It stayed nice and cold. So we are gonna put our beautifully grated cold butter in the freezer just so we can keep it cold because we have these like delicate, nice curls and we want them to stay that way. I'm not even gonna wash my buttery hand because we want all the butter in the biscuit anyway. In this bowl here, we are adding two different types of flour. We have regular AP all-purpose flour and Wonder flour. It's a really cool flour, and a friend of mine actually named Chris Scott made the best biscuits I had ever had in my life. And when I asked him how he got them so light, one of the things he told me was he did half and half. So I'm gonna add the sugar also. And I'm like, no wonder they're so light and fluffy, because Wonder flour is inherently lighter than AP flour. So it really gives your biscuits like a nice lighter puff to it than using all AP. I've added sugar, I'm adding salt, we added baking powder and baking soda. The baking powder and baking soda are gonna help get a little bit more of a puff or lift to it. We are going to little by little just kind of add the butter in and toss it with the dry ingredients, because that way we get to keep all these like, make it rain with butter. We get to keep them separated. The flour is gonna coat each kind of curl of butter individually. It is going to be awesome. And now we have some buttermilk. Recipes will tell you how much to use. Think of that as a guideline. You want your buttermilk to be cold because you want to keep your butter cold. But if you feel your biscuit dough coming together before you've added all of the liquid, stop. Because then you're just gonna have a super wet dough, and that will just get heavy and it'll just kind of, it won't puff the same because the moisture will be so high. So now that it's pretty well combined, we're gonna take it out onto the countertop, grab a little bit of flour for dusting. We call that bench flour. And just kind of push it together. You don't wanna knead the dough like you would knead like a bread dough or something. That excess flour will also help get dry and roll the stuff off your hands. But we're really just pressing and not kneading because we want the dough to keep those separate parts of butter. Lightly dusted a piece of parchment paper, and we're just gonna plop our dough here. And now we're just gonna tuck in the little shaggy edges, and we're gonna press it into a rectangle about 12 by 18. Literally just transfer it to a sheet tray, pop it in the fridge to chill, because again, we wanna keep this butter super cold, and then we're going to start folding and laminating. Yes, yes, okay. Biscuit dough is chilled. I like to make things do the work for me, so I'm gonna use the parchment paper to do a book fold. I'm gonna fold it in a third of the way here, press it down, and then use this side of the parchment paper to fold it inward so the two kind of make a seam down the center. As soon as the butter starts to warm up, it's gonna get really sticky, so you wanna make sure that you're dusting with your bench flour. If it's sticking to your hand, it's gonna stick to the parchment paper. So we're going to do the book fold and then fold it in half. So essentially we're getting 1, 2, 3, 4 layers each time. I'm gonna dust it again. Between the flour and keeping your dough chilled, you'll be fine. So we're nicely dusted. We're gonna do a second book fold. Left side, right side. My #1 biscuit tip is don't forget the salt. You know, and a lot of times in cooking, we use unsalted butter because we want to control the amount of seasoning that we have. But a little bit of salt and a little bit of sugar really help make the flavor come alive on your palate. We're back into a rectangle. We want to go again to about 12 by 18. And then we're going to go back onto the tray. Make sure we're not sticking. We are nicely dusted. They are going to get good rise, so don't worry about making them too tall. As long as they're about 1/3 to 1/2 of an inch, you're good. Chill this bad boy, let that butter seize up again, and then we're going to cut and bake. Okay, dough is chilled. We're going to start cutting it. So here's the dough after we've done our 2 bookfuls, and you can see the grains of butter are still separate. You don't see any large clumps of butter that will weigh down. It looks really, really good. It's like little pebbles, essentially, like on a beach in the sand, living life. So I'm just tightening up the edges. We're going square biscuits. Best way, cut in half first. We'll do half of this big, so we have like some really nice big biscuits. So if you feel like frying some chicken thighs, you know, you've got the perfect size biscuit to go with it. And yes, right in here you can see all the little shards of butter and the layers in the flour. Doesn't that look awesome? So once our biscuits are cut and trayed up, we're gonna pop them back in the fridge just to keep them cold while we make the little honey butter that gets brushed on top. So 10-15 minutes in the fridge, and then we're gonna make our honey butter to brush on top. So it's kind of like making simple syrup. We have about 2 tablespoons of butter. We're gonna add about the same amount of honey, just so we have equal parts. You don't have to bring it to a boil. You just wanna make sure that the butter is completely melted. Once the biscuits come out of the oven, we're gonna brush this on. It's gonna like absorb into the biscuit itself and like leave a nice little shine of butter and honey on top. So our oven is set at 425. High heat is important for this puff pastry. Anything where you want that butter to evaporate and puff really quickly. If you do lower heat, it'll kind of melt first before you get that puff. So our oven is 425. We're gonna pop our biscuits in, and then we'll make the gravy. Okay, we're gonna start with a tiny bit of oil, and we're gonna brown up our ground pork. We just have our ground pork here cooked. We wanna get a little bit of color on it, but not too much. But we do wanna get a little fond in the pan, which is just more flavor. So we're gonna let it keep cooking. And I've added salt and pepper, a little bit of brown sugar. We're gonna add some ground sage. So now I'm adding Italian seasoning, which is a blend of thyme, oregano, dried basil, and that is used extensively in the South, like for everything, especially in like Creole cuisine, because after slavery ended, there were heavy recruitment for workers in Southern Italy. So I'm just gonna grate in a little nutmeg. If you notice in French cuisine, anytime there's a white sauce, it has a little bit of nutmeg, and that's the same in Southern cuisine. It just helps like give you a little spice and warmth that cuts through that heavy sauce. Some color coming on, and we've toasted up our spices. We're gonna add in our butter and let that melt in. So what we're doing here is adding fat to the pork. I know, it seems weird, like pork has enough fat, why add more? But it's because if you see, ground pork is on the leaner side, so we need to add a little bit of additional fat to kind of create our roux. So I'm using Wondra flour again instead of all-purpose because Wondra is just awesome. It's a pre-gelatinized starch, so regular flour you notice is a little clumpy because it's raw. Wondra flour is pre-gelatinized. It means they cook the starch globules or whatever they're called, expand, and then they get dried out and cooked. So that way they're pre-gelatinized, so they take less time to cook, but more importantly, they don't bind together. So you see how separate that is? As opposed to all-purpose flour, you would see like a little bit of like soft clumping. So if you can't get Wondra, just for every cup of all-purpose flour, you wanna add about 1 to 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. So this is looking really good. I'm gonna turn the heat down a tiny bit, and we're gonna start adding our milk. So we're gonna use a whisk just to get it started. You wanna add a little bit first, and just make sure that you scrape up all of the flour that's stuck to the bottom of the pan. It's kind of like deglazing, but with milk instead of like wine, like you would for a stew. But that way we know that we're not gonna have any parts stuck to the bottom of the pan that will burn. 3 cups. We've dissolved our flour. We're gonna let this come up to a simmer because the flour will thicken as it heats up a little bit. And in the meantime, we're going to brush our biscuits. Nice. These look amazing. Turn the heat down, came to a simmer. Nice, thickened. It's not crazy thick, it's not super heavy, but it has some body to it that'll stick to the biscuits like perfectly. The biscuits just came out of the oven. While they are still hot, we wanna brush them with our honey butter. It's important to do this while they're still warm because you want the butter to melt into the biscuits. The honey will melt into the biscuits. It'll create like a nice, shiny, beautiful layer. Oh, yes. Now that is a biscuit. Like that is just pure happiness. The top and the bottom are crunchy. You get that from like all that butter in there. It like really caramelizes as it's baking. And you can actually see like the layers in between. Like you see these defined lines. That drop biscuits can be soft and fluffy. We're gonna put a little bit of gravy down first just to keep the biscuits from going all over the place. When we pick the plate up, they can just like slide off. And we are going to nestle our little biscuits right on top. And then we are going to smother in gravy. Oh. And you know, if you have something green, sprinkle it on top, chives, parsley. It makes it look pretty, or you can do a little sprinkle of paprika. And now, best part of today, we get to eat biscuits and gravy. Well, I do, sorry. But if you make this at home, you can too. And it's still crispy. The gravy doesn't make it like soggy. You get like really nice sweetness from the gravy and the biscuit. A little more salt to just like cut through that on top is awesome. But there's so much flavor in the gravy, like from the caraway and the Italian seasoning, that you can't pick out one flavoring necessarily, but you just get kind of the combination of all of them together being like warm and awesome. Oh, this is so much fun. So click the link below for the recipe. This recipe is also in my cookbook, Sunday Best. If you want to follow along with the pop-up series and other recipes, check out Chef Adrienne Cheatham on Instagram.